And if you watched yesterday, the way the Warriors released a statement from the owner of the team, Joe Lacob, the co-chairman, who released a statement saying, among other things, that no player will ever wear Durant's number 35 for the team as long as he himself, Lacob, is the co-chairman. It was a classy statement, a classy release, and that was well handled. Durant's friend Kendrick Perkins, however, who has had a lot to say during this free agency period, said this in The Undefeated about KD leaving Golden State. Quote, "It was time for Kevin Durant to leave Golden State. They were taking him for granted." They were taking him for granted. Marinate on that for just a moment as I turn to David Jacoby and say, is he right? Did the Warriors take Kevin Durant for granted?
I think he's wrong, but I think he's close. I don't think the Warriors took Kevin Durant for granted. They were willing to offer him 5 years, $220 million. That's not taking someone for granted. I think it was us. I think it was the media, and I think it was the fans. I think the way that we celebrated Steph Curry, the way that when Kevin Durant was out, we celebrated how successful they were without him. He was there 3 years. Every year he didn't rupture his Achilles. They won the championship, and he was the Finals MVP. I don't think anyone in the Warriors organization took him for granted. I think it was the noise around the Warriors and the way that we covered him and the way that the fans talked about him that forced him to have burner accounts on social media that makes this sentiment about being taken for granted real.
Don't think they forced him to have burner accounts on social media.
We did.
All right, but yes, I agree with everything else. I mean, you talking about the fact that this is one of the greatest players that we can see in the game today, and at the end of his career could be historically great. And I don't think that the Warriors at any point in time, any of the one in that locker room took him for granted. There were disagreements. Sure, the incident with Draymond Green that happened earlier this year, there were moments where you would look at it and say, okay, are they getting along? But taking for granted, you cannot play with Kevin Durant, watch how hard he works, and take that for granted. I do think from a fan's perspective and the narrative around him, we devalued those two championships.
Yes.
We devalued the run to the MVP in the NBA Finals because we said he already went to a team that was ready-made to win a championship and had already won a championship prior to his arrival. We also noted that this team was always going to be, in the eyes of the fans of the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry's team, because he was the one that took this organization from where it was to where it is now because of his skill set, his ability to shoot the three, the Splash Brothers, all of that stuff was established before Kevin. And so from that perspective, yes, I do believe that the fans in particular and us in the media world diminished and wanted to diminish what he accomplished there. But I don't think the Warriors themselves did.
Let's put it this way. I believe Kevin Durant felt taken for granted. And sometimes when you feel that way, you point that at absolutely everyone around you. And when there are moments, even if they are ultimately smoothed over, where someone like Draymond Green says, hey, if you want to go ahead. We don't care. We won without you. That, I don't think, goes away so quickly. That stays somewhere in the back of your mind, particularly if you're a person who has the kind of psyche that Kevin Durant seems to, where everything sticks to him, every perceived slight sticks to him. I think that he was never fully embraced, not just by the fan base, which we understand, but I think in some way by the organization. There was always a little bit of a feeling that it was the original guys and Kevin, who kind of came in as a hired gun. And I don't think that ever fully went away until the moment that he went out there when he shouldn't have. When in retrospect, he clearly shouldn't have. And at the time, someone should probably have been saying he shouldn't go out there. And the final thing I will say is, when you say we're going to retire his number and all the rest of that, that's an easy thing to say after your medical staff looked him in the face and said, there's no way you will tear your Achilles. And he goes out there and does exactly that, which the one little thing here that we are all dancing around saying is, history says he will never be the same player again. Now, I hope that I am as far from right on that as a person could possibly be. I hope he goes across the river and returns to being the best player in basketball, which he has been. But history tells us with that injury, that doesn't happen. They put him on the court with that injury. I'm not suggesting they did it maliciously, but the reality is that's what happened. So all those things added up, I understand why he and his friends may feel they took him for granted.
Well, and I think what the other point to play off of where you feel that taken for granted aspect of it is the fact that we consistently devalue his championship run. We consistently sit there and say, well, these championships don't count as much as LeBron winning a championship in Cleveland.
But that's right. But it's true.
But you hear all of that, and from a perspective, you're like, okay, well, fine, I'll go to the Nets and I'll win a championship with the Nets. Will you then welcome me in and say that this is a valued championship?
Well, we live in a world where the narrative dictates so many things that happen. That is the narrative that was created around KD. The day KD, July 4th of whatever it is now, 3 years ago, announced that he was going to the Warriors, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative, and I agreed with most of it. That if you were watching my old show at the time, I said at the time, he should do exactly what he wants. If this makes him happy, good for him. But it is a terrible thing for the NBA, and no one will ever credit him for anything they accomplish there, and that is the reality.
It's what's odd, to put a bow on this whole thing. What I find interesting about all of this is, in order for him to be embraced and to be celebrated the way that we celebrate Kawhi and the way that we celebrate LeBron, he's just as good as them. But we always devalue everything he does. In order for all that to happen, it was actually this injury. It was the injury. You listen to the way his teammates spoke about him after the injury, and the GM emotionally spoke about him after the injury. It took this injury for us to sort of stop taking him for granted.
Correct.
As a fans, which is interesting.
I actually thought he might re-sign in Golden State for that reason. But I think that there was an element of trust that may have been irreparably damaged with the medical staff and the way that whole circumstance. I want to make it clear. I don't believe that was maliciously done, without question. But there's also no doubt someone made a really, really bad mistake. And that's the kind of mistake you can't make. It's very hard to come back from. He's going to be paying the price for the next year at least. Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports, highlights, and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.